The gravitational sensors screamed their warnings across Terra Station's command deck as reality itself seemed to tear open beyond Jupiter's orbit. What emerged defied every law of physics humanity thought they understood. A vessel so massive it cast shadows across 3 moons simultaneously. The Veltar dreadnought, Corvaleth, stretched 40 kilometers from bow to stern, its crystalline hull pulsing with energy signatures that made Earth's most powerful reactors look like birthday candles. Captain Lyrics Voss watched the readings cascade across her displays, each number more impossible than the last. The alien ship's weapon systems alone drew more power than humanity's entire electrical grid. According to the preliminary scans, those weapons could liquefy continents with surgical precision. "Ma'am," Communications Officer Rin Havek's voice cracked slightly, "they're broadcasting on all frequencies. The translation matrix it's working, somehow. They're demanding our immediate surrender." The message that followed chilled every soul on the station. The Veltar had conquered 17 star systems in the past decade, their planet crackers turning entire worlds into asteroid fields when inhabitants proved insufficiently compliant. They spoke of humanity as another primitive species to be cataloged and controlled. But deep in Sector 7's research facility, Dr. Cale Morthen barely looked up from his quantum resonance chamber. For 3 years, he'd been working on something the military brass couldn't quite understand. Technology that didn't destroy but rather convinced matter to simply change its mind about existing in certain configurations. "The phase variance is perfect," he murmured to his assistant, Dr. Nix Torel. "We're not fighting their shields. We're asking them politely to become something else entirely." Above them, the Veltar broadcast their ultimatum. Humanity had 72 hours to submit or face planetary bombardment. Their previous conquests had taken mere days once the bombardment began. Entire civilizations had knelt before the might of their reality-rending weapons. What they didn't understand was that humanity had spent centuries perfecting the art of making the impossible seem routine. While the Veltar had focused on building bigger guns, humans had been asking different questions entirely. Not, how do we hit harder, but what if the very concept of armor became irrelevant? Commander Zelix Crane of the UEF's Experimental Defense Division received Dr. Morthen's preliminary report just as the alien deadline ticked down to 60 hours. The mathematics were elegant in their simplicity. Instead of meeting force with force, they would meet certainty with possibility. The Veltar had never encountered an enemy that could make their mighty warships question their own existence. They were about to learn that sometimes the greatest strength lay not in the ability to destroy planets, but in the gentle art of convincing reality that those planet crackers had always been made of butterflies and good intentions. As the first, human response ships began their approach, powered by technology that hummed rather than roared, the galaxy was about to witness something unprecedented. The Veltar expected another conquest. Instead, they were about to discover that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't built to destroy. It was built to transform. The war that would reshape the understanding of conflict itself was about to begin, and neither side truly understood what they were walking into. The Veltar battle group consisted of 7 dreadnoughts, each one capable of sterilizing a planet's surface in minutes. Fleet Commander Kethmore reviewed the tactical display with the confidence of someone who had never experienced defeat. The human ships approaching were laughably small, barely the size of the Veltar's maintenance shuttles. Their vessels read, "As civilian transports," his tactical officer reported. "No detectable weapons, minimal shielding. This will be concluded swiftly." On the bridge of the UEF ship Paradigm Shift, Captain Vera Thorne felt the familiar hum of the quantum resonance, drive reaching operational parameters. Unlike the thunderous roar of conventional engines, Dr. Morthen's creation whispered its presence, a gentle vibration that seemed to make space itself more flexible. "All ships report ready for field deployment," her weapons officer, Lieutenant Dex Rallian, announced. The term weapons was misleading. They carried no missiles, no energy cannons, no traditional armaments of any kind. Instead, they carried something far more revolutionary, devices that could introduce uncertainty into the most certain of realities. The first Veltar salvo came without warning. Crimson beams of concentrated force lanced across space, each one carrying enough energy to vaporize Manhattan. They struck the human formation with precision that spoke of eons of military experience, and passed harmlessly through empty space where the human ships had been moments before. "Impossible!" Kethmore snarled. "Scan for cloaking fields, phase variants, dimensional shifts." But the human ships hadn't moved. They occupied the exact same coordinates as before. The Veltar weapons had simply missed. Not in the conventional sense. The targeting had been perfect. Rather, the space the weapons traveled through had momentarily contained a probability that the targets existed elsewhere. Dr. Morthen, monitoring from the paradigm shift, smiled as his readings confirmed the field's effectiveness. "The quantum uncertainty principle," he explained to Captain Thorne, "suggests that at the most fundamental level, reality is more guideline than rule. We're simply making those guidelines more negotiable." The Veltar fired again, this time with concentrated barrages from all 7 dreadnoughts. The space around the human fleet became a storm of destructive energy that should have reduced every molecule to constituent atoms. Instead, the human ships began to shimmer, not with defensive shields, but with something far more unsettling. They became simultaneously present and absent, real and unreal, existing in a state of quantum superposition that made conventional weapons as effective as trying to punch a probability cloud. "Return fire," Captain Thorne ordered calmly. The human response was unlike anything the Veltar had ever encountered. No beams of energy, no projectiles, no explosive force of any kind. Instead, gentle pulses of quantum uncertainty rippled outward from the human ships, washing over the alien dreadnoughts like invisible tide. For several seconds, nothing seemed to happen. Then Commander Kethmore's flagship began to change. The hull didn't melt or explode, it simply started to reconsider its current molecular arrangement. Sections of the mighty dreadnought flickered between states of matter as if reality couldn't quite decide what the ship was supposed to be made of. "Damage report," Kethmore bellowed. "Sir, our hull integrity is uncertain. The armor plating appears to be experiencing an identity crisis. Engineering reports that our primary weapons array is now convinced it's a flowering garden, and Deck 7 is insisting it's made of crystallized music." The war had begun, and already the fundamental assumptions about warfare were crumbling, faster than the Veltar's confidence in their own invincibility. The Corvaleth shuddered as another wave of quantum uncertainty washed over its superstructure. What had once been 15 meters of impenetrable crystalline armor was now flickering between states, sometimes solid, sometimes gaseous, and occasionally displaying properties that violated several fundamental laws of physics simultaneously. "Commander," Kethmore gripped his command chair as the deck beneath his feet momentarily forgot it was supposed to be horizontal. "Engineering! Status report!" Chief Engineer Vextal's voice crackled through the intercom, barely maintaining professional composure. "Sir, our primary reactor is experiencing an existential crisis. It keeps alternating between fusion and a rather lovely display of bioluminescent fungi. Also, Weapons Bay 3 appears to have transformed into what our sensors can only describe as concentrated nostalgia." Across the battle space, the human fleet continued their gentle but devastating assault. Dr. Morthen monitored the cascading effects from the paradigm shift, his instruments detecting the spreading quantum instability throughout the Veltar formation. The beauty of uncertainty he explained to the bridge crew, is that it's contagious. Once you introduce doubt into a system's fundamental nature, that doubt spreads. Their ships aren't just questioning their own existence, they're questioning the existence of everything around them. Captain Thorne watched as the second Veltar dreadnought began experiencing similar effects. Its weapon systems were firing, but the energy beams emerged as streams of harmless flower petals, butterfly migrations, and what appeared to be liquid mathematics. The mighty planet crackers had become something closer to abstract art installations. "This is magnificent," Lieutenant Rallian whispered. "We're not destroying them. We're editing them." But the Veltar were not helpless. Kethmore's tactical mind, honed by decades of conquest, began adapting to this unprecedented threat. "All ships, Emergency Protocol Omega, activate the reality anchors." Deep within each dreadnought, ancient devices hummed to life. The Veltar had conquered reality-bending species before, though never ones quite like humanity. The anchors were designed to lock local space-time into rigid certainty, preventing any form of dimensional or quantum manipulation. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The human ship's shimmering uncertainty began to solidify, their quantum superposition collapsing into fixed states. Dr. Morthen's instruments screamed warnings as the comfortable ambiguity of existence was forced into harsh, definitive reality. "They're fighting back," he announced grimly. "They're forcing certainty onto our uncertainty fields. It's actually quite clever." Captain Thorne felt the change immediately. The gentle hum of the quantum drive became a grinding struggle as it fought against the Veltar's reality anchors. "Options, Doctor?" "Well," Morthen mused, studying his readings, "they're using brute force certainty to counter our elegant uncertainty. But certainty, by its very nature, is brittle. If we can't make their ships uncertain about what they are—" He paused, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Perhaps we can make them absolutely certain they're something else entirely." He began recalibrating the quantum resonance fields, adjusting them from gentle suggestion to firm declaration. Instead of asking the Veltar ships to consider alternative states of existence, the new configuration would politely but firmly inform them of what they had always been. "All ships," Captain Thorne announced, "prepare for Phase 2. We're about to convince the enemy fleet that they've always been a traveling circus." The war was evolving, and with it, humanity's understanding of what it truly meant to fight for survival. Sometimes victory didn't come from superior firepower, but from superior imagination. The quantum resonance generators aboard the human fleet recalibrated with harmonious precision. Where before they had whispered suggestions of uncertainty, now they sang declarations of absolute truth, just not the truth the Veltar expected. Commander Kethmore watched in growing horror as his reality anchors, meant to preserve the certainty of his ship's existence, instead locked them into the human-imposed certainty that they were something entirely different. The Corvaleth shuddered and began its transformation. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, voice strained with disbelief, "our hull configuration is changing. The armor plating is rearranging itself into what appears to be decorative facades, and our weapon emplacements are becoming what?" Kethmore demanded. "Cotton candy dispensers, sir. Very elaborate ones." Across the battle space, 7 of the galaxy's most feared dreadnoughts were experiencing identity reconstruction on a massive scale. The third ship in the formation found its primary reactor core convinced it was actually a carousel, complete with painted horses that galloped in nuclear fusion circles. The fourth ship's bridge had become certain it was a comfortable tea parlor, complete with doilies that were formerly tactical displays. Dr. Morthen observed the transformation with scientific fascination. "The quantum certainty field is working perfectly," he reported to Captain Thorne. "By forcing absolute certainty about their new nature, we've bypassed their reality anchors entirely. They can't doubt what they absolutely know to be true. But The Veltar were not the galaxy's apex predators by accident. In the depths of the transforming dreadnoughts, backup systems older and more fundamental than reality anchors began to activate. These were consciousness preservation protocols, technology that could maintain the essential nature of a being or object regardless of external modifications to its physical form. Fleet Commander Kethmore felt the familiar weight of command settle back onto his shoulders as the preservation protocols synchronized with his neural patterns. Around him, his bridge crew began to remember their true nature, even as their ship continued to insist it was part of an interstellar carnival. All vessels, he broadcast on emergency frequencies, activate consciousness preservation. Remember who we are, regardless of what we appear to be. The effect was unsettling in its own way. The Veltar crews found themselves operating weapons, systems that had taken the form of game booths and amusement rides, but which still retained their fundamental destructive capability. A cotton candy machine that fired planet crackers, a carousel that could tear holes in space-time. Fascinating, Dr. Morthen murmured as his sensors detected the Veltar adaptation. They're maintaining cognitive integrity while allowing physical transformation. It's like consciousness wearing a costume. The renewed Veltar attack came without warning. Beams of concentrated destruction emerged from teacup rides and funhouse mirrors, striking the human fleet with the same devastating power they'd always possessed. The paradigm shift rocked under the assault, its quantum uncertainty fields struggling against weapons that somehow maintained their lethality despite their whimsical appearance. Captain Thorne's mind raced through the tactical implications. They've separated form from function. Their ships may look like carnival attractions, but they're still warships. Then we need to address the consciousness maintaining the function, Dr. Morthen realized. He began frantically recalibrating his equipment yet again. If we can't change what they are by changing their physical form, perhaps we can change what they think they are by changing their relationship to existence itself. The quantum resonance generators began emitting a new frequency, one that didn't target matter or energy, but rather the information patterns that defined conscious experience. It was the most dangerous application of quantum uncertainty yet attempted, touching the very nature of awareness itself. "Doctor," Captain Thorne said quietly, "are we crossing a line here?" Morthen paused, his hand hovering over the activation controls. Around them, the carnival ship Corvaleth was preparing another devastating salvo. "Captain, they came here to crack our planet. I think they crossed the line first." The frequency activated, and suddenly the nature of consciousness itself became negotiable. The quantum consciousness interference field rippled outward from the human fleet like a wave of liquid thought. When it reached the Veltar formation, something unprecedented occurred in the history of galactic warfare. The enemy began to experience uncertainty about their own motivations. Commander Kethmore blinked as the preservation protocols in his mind started questioning their own purpose. The absolute certainty that he was a Veltar fleet commander remained intact, but suddenly he couldn't quite remember why that meant he should be firing on the humans. The concept of conquest, once as natural as breathing, now seemed arbitrary. "Sir," his weapons officer called out, her voice tinged with confusion, "I'm having difficulty understanding why we would want to destroy these beings. They seem pleasant. Clever, certainly. Their ship modifications are quite artistic." Around the bridge, similar conversations were breaking out as the Veltar crew experienced their first taste of existential uncertainty in millennia. They knew who they were, what they were, and where they were. But the why of their actions had become suddenly uncomfortably questionable. Dr. Morthen monitored the effects with mixture of triumph and trepidation. "We're not changing their thoughts," he explained to Captain Thorne. "We're making them aware of having thoughts. Most aggressive species operate on instinct and conditioning. When you introduce genuine choice into that equation, you get philosophy, majors. Lieutenant Rallian observed, watching as the Veltar ships began moving in increasingly hesitant patterns, their previously decisive formations becoming loose and contemplative. But consciousness, once awakened to its own nature, proved to be a double-edged gift. On the bridge of the Corvaleth, Commander Kethmore found himself experiencing something his species had lost eons ago: genuine curiosity about other forms of life. "Human vessels," he broadcast, his voice carrying new overtones of uncertainty and wonder. We find ourselves questioning our previous intentions. Your technology is unlike anything we have encountered. Instead of increasing our certainty about reality, you have introduced us to the possibility that reality might be more interesting than we believed." Captain Thorne exchanged glances with Dr. Morthen. "Are we winning?" Before Morthen could answer, new alerts began cascading across their displays. The quantum consciousness field was having unintended consequences. The awakened awareness in the Veltar crews was spreading beyond their immediate tactical situation, reaching deeper into their civilizational programming. "Sir," the Veltar communications officer reported to Kethmore, "I'm receiving reports from across our fleet. The crews are questioning everything. Not just this battle, but our entire expansion protocol. Lieutenant Vexkoth on the Devastator is asking why we call it the Devastator when it could just as easily be called the Friendly Neighborhood Helper." The transformation was accelerating. 7 ships full of the galaxy's most feared warriors were experiencing their first collective philosophical awakening. Weapon systems designed for planetary annihilation were being repurposed for artistic expression. The third dreadnought had begun using its reality-cracking arrays to compose what could only be described as three-dimensional poetry in the quantum foam. "This is either the most effective military victory in human history," Captain Thorne mused, "or we've accidentally created the galaxy's first space-going philosophy department." Dr. Morthen frowned at his readings. "Captain, there's something else. The consciousness field isn't contained to their ships. It's propagating, following their communication networks back to their home systems. Across the galaxy, on 17 conquered worlds, Veltar occupation forces were suddenly experiencing the novel sensation of wondering whether their occupied subjects might actually have valid points about self-determination. The greatest military empire in known space was having its first collective identity crisis. And in the space between the opposing fleets, reality itself began to take note of what was happening and started to have some rather interesting ideas of its own. The quantum consciousness field had spread far beyond its intended scope. Across the Veltar communication network, spanning 17 star systems, something unprecedented was occurring. An entire interstellar civilization was experiencing its first collective moment of self-reflection. On the occupied world of Kethmar, Garrison Commander Ulksven looked out over the mining operations his forces had been overseeing for 3 years and found himself asking a question that had never occurred to him before. What if the indigenous population actually likes their mountains the way they are? The question was so fundamentally alien to Veltar, thinking that it created a cognitive cascade. If the locals preferred their landscape intact, and if their preferences mattered, and if their preferences mattered as much as Veltar preferences, then perhaps the entire conquest paradigm required re-examination. Back in the space near Jupiter, Dr. Morthen watched his instruments with growing amazement and concern. "The field has created what can only be described as a civilizational enlightenment event," he reported. "Every Veltar individual connected to their neural network is simultaneously discovering concepts like empathy, aesthetic appreciation, and philosophical inquiry." Commander Kethmore's voice came over the communication channel, but it was transformed. Where once had been the crisp authority of military command, now there was wonder, confusion, and something that sounded remarkably like joy. "Human philosophers," he said, and the very term seemed to surprise him. "We have been thinking about thinking. It is the most remarkable experience. We had forgotten that thoughts could be examined rather than simply executed. The Corvaleth had become something beyond a mere carnival ship. Its hull now displayed flowing patterns of bioluminescent art, created by weapon systems that had decided their true purpose was aesthetic rather than destructive. The other dreadnoughts were undergoing similar transformations, becoming expressions of newfound creativity rather than instruments of war. "Sir," Lieutenant Rallian observed, "I think we may have accidentally ended their entire empire." Captain Thorne watched as the Veltar fleet began forming new configurations, not tactical formations, but geometric patterns that seemed to exist purely for their beauty. "Is that good or bad?" Dr. Morthen considered the question seriously. "Well, they're no longer trying to crack our planet. On the other hand, we've fundamentally altered the consciousness of billions of beings across multiple star systems. The ethical implications are substantial." As if summoned by his words, new contacts began appearing on the tactical display. Ships were arriving from across Veltar space. Not warships, but vessels of every conceivable design and function. Cargo haulers, research vessels, civilian transports, and craft that defied classification were converging on the Jupiter system. "Human friends," came a broadcast from the growing fleet. "We have come to apologize? Is that the correct term? We find ourselves experiencing something we are told is called regret regarding our previous actions. Also, we would very much like to learn more about this art concept, and music, and perhaps cookies, though we are uncertain what those might be." The transformation was complete. The Veltar Empire, built on certainty and conquest, had become something entirely new, a vast collective of newly conscious beings eager to explore the infinite possibilities of existence they had never known. Existed. But consciousness, once awakened, brings with it not just wonder but responsibility. And across the galaxy, other species were beginning to take notice of what had happened to the previously invincible Veltar. Some viewed it as liberation. Others saw it as an opportunity. And a few began to wonder if the humans could do this. To the Veltar, what might they do to anyone else who opposed them? 6 months after the Battle of Jupiter, the Sol system had become the most unusual diplomatic hub in galactic history. Where once only human ships had patrolled, now a bewildering array of vessels from across known space shared orbital patterns with an enthusiasm that occasionally resulted in what could only be described as interpretive collision art. The former. Veltar dreadnought Corvaleth had established itself as the system's cultural center, its weapon bays converted into galleries displaying works that challenged the fundamental nature of artistic expression. Its planet-cracking arrays now generated sculptures made of crystallized time, while its reality anchors had been repurposed to create stable pockets of space where impossible colors could exist. Captain Vera Thorne stood on the observation deck of Terra Station, watching as a Veltar exploration vessel, formerly a destroyer-class ship, performed what could only be described as a ballet with 3 human research craft and a visiting delegation of crystalline beings who communicated through harmonious frequency modulation. "Status report," she requested from Dr. Cale Morthen, who had become something between a chief scientist and an accidental ambassador to consciousness itself. "The integration process continues to exceed all projections," Morthen replied, consulting a datapad that occasionally flickered through states of matter when he wasn't looking directly at it. "The former Veltar territories have established what they're calling exploration cooperatives rather than military hierarchies. 17 star systems have gone from conquest-based societies to, well, to what can only be described as galaxy-scale art communes." Through the observation port, they could see the newest arrival to the system, a massive vessel that had once been the Veltar's most feared siege platform. It now served as a mobile university, its crew eagerly studying concepts, like literature, philosophy, and what they had termed the delicious uncertainty of friendship. Any regrets, Doctor? Captain Thorne asked. Morthen considered the question while watching a formation of ships create geometric patterns that seemed to exist in more dimensions than local space-time strictly allowed. We set out to defend Earth from an overwhelming military force, he said finally. Instead, we've accidentally introduced the concept of wonder to a civilization that had forgotten it could exist. I'd say that's a net positive. But even as the Sol system celebrated its unlikely peace, the implications of humanity's victory were rippling throughout the galaxy. Species that had lived in terror of Veltar expansion now found themselves free to pursue their own development. Some thrived in this new freedom. Others, accustomed to the structure that fear provided, struggled with the sudden lack of external threat. And then there were those who saw opportunity where others saw liberation. The Kronex hegemony, watching from the galactic rim, had observed the transformation of the Veltar with interest rather than relief. Their military strategists reached a conclusion that would have been impossible before humanity's intervention. If consciousness could be modified, then it could also be controlled. The humans have revealed a new form of warfare, Supreme Coordinator Vashti announced to the Hegemony Council. They have weaponized philosophy itself. But any weapon can be turned against its creators. Back in the Sol system, Dr. Morthen's instruments detected the first whispers of something new approaching from the galactic rim. Ships that seemed to exist in states of absolute certainty, their consciousness locked into patterns so rigid that they appeared immune to quantum uncertainty fields. "Captain," he said quietly, "I think we may have a problem. It appears someone has been studying our techniques and developing countermeasures." Captain Thorne smiled, watching as a Veltar vessel painted aurora patterns across Jupiter's atmospheric storms while its crew composed what they insisted was a symphony in 17 dimensions. "Doctor," she said, "if someone wants to challenge the civilization that accidentally convinced the galaxy's greatest warriors to become philosophers and artists, I suspect they're going to discover that we've learned a few new things about the nature of conflict ourselves. The age of traditional warfare was ending. The age of consciousness warfare had begun. And humanity, having opened this particular door, was about to discover what lay on the other side of absolute certainty meeting infinite possibility. The galaxy would never be the same, and neither would the definition of victory itself. In the EI's end, they had set out to defend their world from planet-cracking warships. Instead, they had defended the very concept of growth, change, and the beautiful uncertainty that made conscious existence possible. The Veltar had come to conquer a planet, and found themselves conquered by the possibility that life could be more than conquest. And that, perhaps, was the most human victory of all.